Before we dive into this heartwarming story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining us. And if you enjoy stories that warm the soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Now, let's turn down the lights and let the story begin. The wind howled a lonely tune through the skeletal branches of the old oak in Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth's sprawling backyard. It was a late November chill, the kind that seeped into your bones and reminded you of the starkness of winter, much like the stark emptiness that now filled Eleanor's life. Just 6 months ago, her beloved husband, Arthur, had succumbed to a sudden heart attack, leaving her adrift in a sea of grief and the vast, echoing silence of their grand Victorian mansion in Oakwood, Connecticut. Eleanor, a woman of considerable wealth, found that money offered little solace against the gaping hole in her heart. The grand dinners, the lavish vacations, the endless stream of social events, all of it now tasted like ashes. She found herself spending her days wandering through the house, touching Arthur's favorite armchair, gazing at his framed photographs, and reliving the golden memories of their life together. One particularly bleak afternoon, Eleanor decided to venture into town. She hadn't been to Oakwood's main street in months, preferring the solitude of her estate. The town, once a vibrant hub of activity, seemed to have aged along with her grief. Storefronts were boarded up, and the few remaining businesses looked weary and worn. As she walked, she noticed a small, almost hidden bakery tucked away in a narrow alley. It was called the Flower and Flame, and its windows, though smudged, displayed a meager assortment of pastries. A hand-painted sign, slightly crooked, declared, "Fresh bread daily." Something compelled Eleanor to step inside. The warmth of the bakery enveloped her like a gentle hug. The air was thick with the comforting aroma of baking bread, cinnamon, and sugar, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile atmosphere of her home. Behind the counter, a young man with tired eyes and flour-dusted hands was carefully arranging a tray of cookies. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice a little hoarse, but with a hint of genuine warmth. "What can I get for you?" Eleanor hesitated. "Just a loaf of bread, please." As he wrapped the warm loaf in brown paper, she noticed the lines of worry etched on his face. "Business been slow?" she asked, unable to suppress her curiosity. He sighed. "It has. The economy's been rough, and people are cutting back. I'm barely making ends meet." "What's your name?" "Thomas. Thomas Bellweather." Eleanor took the bread, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. "It's a lovely bakery," she said, genuinely impressed by the quality of the bread. "You have a real talent." Thomas managed a weak smile. "Thank you. It's my dream. I've always wanted to have my own bakery." Eleanor paid for the bread and left, the aroma of the bakery lingering in her senses. As she walked back to her car, she couldn't shake the image of Thomas's weary face and the quiet desperation in his voice. She thought of Arthur, who had always encouraged her to pursue her passions, to find joy in helping others. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The image of Thomas and his struggling bakery kept replaying in her mind. She thought about the boarded-up storefronts on Main Street, the empty benches, the palpable sense of despair that hung over the town. Oakwood, once a thriving community, was slowly dying. She remembered Arthur's words, "Eleanor, wealth is meant to be shared. It's meant to make a difference." The next morning, Eleanor drove back to the Flower and Flame. Thomas was surprised to see her again. "Mrs. Ainsworth," he said, recognizing her. "Did you forget something?" "No, Thomas," she replied, her voice firm. "I came to talk about your dream." She sat at one of the small, worn tables and told him about her own loneliness, her desire to find purpose again. She told him about Arthur's belief in the power of community and the importance of helping others. "I want to help you, Thomas," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I want to invest in your bakery. I want to help you turn it into something special, something that can bring life back to Oakwood." Thomas was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Mrs. Ainsworth, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Thomas," she said, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Say yes to your dream." And so, they began to plan. Eleanor, with her business acumen and financial resources, and Thomas, with his passion and baking skills, formed an unlikely partnership. They spent weeks brainstorming, sketching out plans, and dreaming big. Eleanor envisioned a community bakery, a place where people could gather, share stories, and find comfort in the simple pleasure of good food. She wanted it to be a place that employed the needy, offering them a chance to rebuild their lives and regain their dignity. Thomas, with Eleanor's support, began experimenting with new recipes, creating unique breads and pastries that reflected the diverse flavors of Oakwood's residents. He sourced local ingredients, supporting the farmers and producers in the surrounding area. They renovated the bakery, transforming it from a cramped, dimly lit space into a warm and inviting haven. They painted the walls in cheerful colors, installed new ovens and baking equipment, and added a cozy seating area with comfortable chairs and tables. News of the bakery's transformation spread quickly through Oakwood. People were curious, intrigued by the sudden burst of activity in the once-forgotten alley. As the grand opening approached, Eleanor felt a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just a grieving widow, she was a partner, a mentor, a catalyst for change. The day of the grand opening arrived, and the bakery was packed with people. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Thomas, beaming with pride, stood behind the counter, serving customers with a newfound confidence. Eleanor watched from a corner table, her heart swelling with joy. She saw the smiles on people's faces, the sense of community that was slowly returning to Oakwood. She saw the spark of hope in Thomas's eyes, a spark that had been rekindled by her belief in him. As the day drew to a close, Eleanor walked over to Thomas. "You did it, Thomas," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You made your dream come true." Thomas looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "We did it, Mrs. Ainsworth," he said. "We did it together." And as the last of the customers left, and the lights of the bakery dimmed, Eleanor knew that she had found a new purpose in life. She had found a way to honor Arthur's memory, to make a difference in the world, one loaf of bread at a time. The taste of ashes had finally been replaced by the sweet, comforting taste of flour and flame. The flour and flame, now christened Eleanor's Hearth, in honor of its benefactor, became the heart of Oakwood. It was more than just a bakery, it was a sanctuary. The warm glow from its windows spilled onto the cobbled alleyway, a beacon in the often dreary Connecticut evenings. Inside, the air hummed with conversation, the clinking of mugs, and the gentle rhythm of Thomas kneading dough. Eleanor, once a recluse, found herself spending most days at the bakery. She'd sit at her usual corner table, a cup of strong coffee in hand, observing the ebb and flow of Oakwood life. She'd watch Thomas, his face alight with passion, as he crafted his culinary masterpieces. She'd listen to the stories shared by the regulars, the laughter of children, and the whispered confessions of those seeking solace. The bakery became a lifeline for the town's struggling residents. Eleanor, true to her vision, had insisted on hiring those who needed a second chance. There was Maria, a single mother who had lost her job at the shuttered textile mill, and old Mr. Henderson, a veteran who struggled with PTSD and found comfort in the repetitive task of washing dishes. Thomas, with Eleanor's guidance, had blossomed into a confident businessman. He was no longer just a baker, he was a leader, a mentor, a pillar of the community. He took pride in teaching his employees the art of baking, sharing his knowledge and passion. He ensured everyone was paid a fair wage, and that the environment was supportive. However, the success of Eleanor's Hearth also brought its own set of challenges. The increased foot traffic attracted the attention of local businesses, some of whom were less than thrilled with the competition. A new, upscale cafe opened just down the street, offering artisanal pastries and gourmet coffee. Its sleek, modern design was a stark contrast to the warm, rustic charm of Eleanor's hearth. The owner, a sharp-suited man named Richard Sterling, made no secret of his disdain for the old-fashioned bakery. He'd often be seen glaring at the crowd spilling out of Eleanor's hearth, his lips pursed in disapproval. One evening, as Eleanor was closing up the bakery with Thomas, Richard approached them. "You know," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're really cutting into my profits. Perhaps it's time you considered relocating." Eleanor, her eyes flashing with indignation, stood her ground. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice firm, "this bakery is a part of this community. It's not going anywhere." Richard scoffed. "We'll see about that." The tension between the two businesses simmered, creating a palpable unease in Oakwood. Rumors swirled about Richard's underhanded tactics, his attempts to poach Eleanor's employees, and his constant complaints to the town council about the bakery's unsightly appearance. Amidst this conflict, personal dramas unfolded within the walls of Eleanor's hearth. Maria, the single mother, was struggling to make ends meet, working long hours and barely seeing her children. Mr. Henderson, haunted by his past, found himself slipping into periods of deep depression. Eleanor, ever the compassionate soul, did her best to support her employees. She offered Maria flexible hours and helped her find affordable childcare. She spent hours talking to Mr. Henderson, listening to his stories, and offering him words of encouragement. Thomas, too, was grappling with his own personal struggles. The long hours and the pressure of running a successful business were taking their toll. He found himself increasingly isolated, his passion for baking waning. One evening, as Thomas was working late, Eleanor found him staring out the window, his face etched with weariness. "Thomas," she said, her voice gentle, "what's wrong?" He sighed. "I don't know, Mrs. Ainsworth. I feel like I'm losing myself. I'm so focused on running the business that I've forgotten why I started baking in the first place." Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Thomas," she said, "you're not alone. We're all here for you. You need to remember your joy, the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful with your hands." She took him into the bakery's kitchen, where the aroma of freshly baked bread still lingered. "Let's bake," she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. They spent the next few hours baking, kneading dough, shaping loaves, and decorating pastries. It was a therapeutic experience, a reminder of the simple joy of creation. As they worked, Thomas began to open up, sharing his fears and anxieties. Eleanor listened patiently, offering words of wisdom and encouragement. "Thomas," she said, "you're a talented baker and a wonderful leader. But you can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You need to delegate, to trust your employees, to take time for yourself." Thomas nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Ainsworth," he said. "I don't know what I would do without you." The next day, Thomas took Eleanor's advice. He delegated more tasks to his employees, taking the time to mentor them and build their confidence. He also started taking breaks, spending time with his friends and family. Meanwhile, Eleanor decided to confront Richard Sterling directly. She invited him to the bakery for a cup of coffee and a pastry. Richard, surprised by the invitation, reluctantly agreed. As they sat at a table, Eleanor spoke to him calmly and respectfully. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "I understand that you're concerned about competition. But I believe that there's room for both of us in Oakwood. We can coexist, even thrive, if we focus on serving our customers and building a strong community." Richard, taken aback by her sincerity, hesitated. "Mrs. Ainsworth," he said, "I have to admit, I've underestimated you. You're a formidable businesswoman." Eleanor smiled. "I'm just a woman who believes in the power of community," she said. "And I believe that we can work together to make Oakwood a better place." Richard, after a moment of contemplation, nodded. "I agree," he said. "Let's find a way to cooperate." And so, the rivalry between Eleanor's Hearth and the upscale cafe began to soften. They started collaborating on community events, supporting local charities, and even sharing ingredients. Eleanor's Hearth continued to thrive, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience in Oakwood. The bakery's success was not just about delicious bread and pastries, it was about the sense of community, the shared stories, and the unwavering belief in the power of human connection. Eleanor, once a grieving widow, had found a new purpose in life. She had built a legacy, not of wealth and power, but of compassion and kindness. She had transformed a struggling bakery into a beacon of hope, a place where people could find comfort, connection, and a taste of something truly special. And she had learned that even in the midst of life's challenges, the aroma of rising dough, the warmth of a shared meal, and the strength of a community could heal even the deepest wounds.